They thought they had the perfect plan. No loose ends, no witnesses, no second chances. You were supposed to be nothing more than a memory, a problem erased before it could rise. They paid for your silence, sent their best to make sure you'd never walk again. But look at you, breathing, watching, standing in the very place they swore you'd never reach. And now, their empire isn't just falling, it's burning. This isn't just some legal battle. This is a reckoning. A plot they spent years perfecting turned into the very trap that sealed their fate. And the twist? Their own enforcer, the one who was supposed to take you out, switched sides and exposed everything. Imagine the panic, the scrambling, the desperate attempts to undo what's already set in motion. They thought they had it all under control. They thought they could rewrite reality. But the one thing they never prepared for was you. So sit tight, chosen one. This isn't just survival. This is domination. They wanted you gone, but all they did was give you the stage. Now the world sees exactly who they are, and the best part? There's nothing they can do to stop it. They were convinced it was over, their victory sealed in ink and arrogance. But when the doors swung open and you walked in, unscathed and unmoved, the air in the room thickened with disbelief. Their confidence had been their shield, but now it cracked under the weight of the impossible. The case they built with precision unraveled before their eyes, and the power they once wielded slipped from their grasp. The ones who dictated fates from the shadows now found themselves under an unfamiliar force, one that did not bow, did not break, and did not forget. They thought time was their ally, that months of silence meant the past had been buried for good. But when their carefully placed pawns failed to move as expected, when outcomes they controlled suddenly spiraled beyond their command, the illusion of their dominion shattered. The hand that had once been their executioner had never missed a mark, until now. A final strike meant to be swift-twisted, in a way no plan had accounted for. A perfectly laid trap dissolved in the very moment it should have closed. Their calculations, once meticulous, were now riddled with errors, cracks forming in their certainty. Coincidence? Number this was something beyond their reach, a force they had never accounted for, one that did not require weapons or threats to turn the tide. The balance had shifted, not through resistance, but through something far more profound. Their own instrument of silence had found its voice. Those who had walked paths paved by obedience suddenly hesitated, not out of fear, but because for the first time they saw themselves beyond their purpose. A cog in the machine had become self-aware, and with that awareness came ruin. There was no plea for mercy, no desperate attempts at negotiation. Those who once commanded destruction stood frozen, not by force, but by the weight of what they had set in motion. The hands that had been their tools had become something else entirely. What was once an unshaken certainty was now a question without an answer, an unraveling thread in a fabric they thought was indestructible. And in that moment, the silent enforcer, the one they had relied on without question, turned not to strike, but to reveal. The truths they had buried rose to the surface, their empire built on whispers and control, now exposed to the cold light of consequence. They had designed a flawless structure, one engineered to withstand any threat. Yet, in their arrogance, they built the very mechanism of their downfall. The tide they thought they commanded had reversed, sweeping them into the abyss they had crafted for others. The countdown they set in motion had never been marking someone else's demise. It had been ticking toward their own reckoning. This was not fate negotiating terms. This was not justice bending to convenience. This was the inevitable claiming its due. And when they saw you standing where they swore you never would, the certainty they had clung to collapsed. Their own creation sat beside you, no longer their tool, but the final witness to their undoing. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, now is the time to let that love shine. By clicking the super thank you button and giving $20 or more, you're not just supporting this platform, you're planting seeds of faith that will touch countless lives. Your generosity is a reflection of God's abundance, a gift that echoes beyond what you can see. Step into your purpose. Be a vessel of His grace. Give with faith and watch His kingdom flourish through you. You were made for more. The very tools they forged for control became the chisels carving their downfall. The authority they once wielded with impunity slipped through their fingers, no longer a weapon, but evidence signed in ink and consequence. The space that once bent to their will no longer obeyed. No verdict had been spoken, yet the outcome was etched into the silence. What they thought was erased had only been waiting for its moment to surface. They had written a disappearance into their script, but instead, the narrative rewrote itself. A trail of receipts they overlooked, voices they assumed would stay quiet, and hidden truths that refused to remain in the dark. What was meant to be a forgotten act became undeniable testimony, locking them into the very fate they tried to escape. Your moment is now. Subscribe, and let's achieve greatness together. Their empire thrived on secrecy, but now their names were inked in documents that could not be burned. The quiet they paid for had transformed into headlines, their actions dissected under a scrutiny they had never prepared for. The foundation of their dominion had always depended on one thing: silence. Their influence was not meant to be questioned, their decisions not meant to be contested. Every gap in their story relied on the absence of a challenge. But what they never foresaw was the impossible: a survivor standing in defiance, accompanied by the very force they once trusted to eliminate all threats. The weight of their crimes pressed down, and this time there was no escape hatch, no conveniently vanished records, no disappearing voices. The arena where they once dictated outcomes now held them accountable. The confidence they once draped over themselves like armor turned brittle under the weight of what they could no longer control. Justice does not only protect, it dismantles, piece by piece, until there is nowhere left to hide. What began as a calculated strike against an inconvenience spiraled into an unraveling they could not contain. The mechanisms they thought infallible crumbled. Hidden financial trails surfaced, carefully orchestrated denials disintegrated, and every step taken to bury the truth became another nail in the casket of their authority. What they once controlled was no longer theirs to command. They sought to eliminate a variable, yet in doing so, they unchained forces that could not be silenced. What should have been a closed door swung open to revelations they could never have foreseen. The system they once manipulated with ease fractured under the weight of betrayal, and the hands that once followed orders now signed confessions. The power they built on unshaken loyalty had rotted from within. Their influence, once an unchallenged force, now faded under the glare of exposure. Those who once acted in shadows no longer hid. Their whispers became records, their secrets became evidence, and the very structure they believed indestructible collapsed, not by external force, but by its own unraveling threads. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. They forged their weapons in the dark, convinced that their plans were foolproof. They whispered, plotted, and pulled every string, believing they could rewrite fate. But what they never understood was who was writing the story. They built a tower so high, so fortified, they thought nothing could touch them, until the very foundation cracked beneath their feet. The stone they rejected, the one they tried to bury, became the cornerstone of their downfall. See, survival was never just about enduring the storm. It was about becoming the storm. They didn't just fail to erase you. They set the stage for your rise. Every trap they laid, every scheme they spun, every whispered plan meant to silence you only made your voice louder. What they designed as a disappearance became a demonstration. Every attempt to erase your presence became another chapter in a story too powerful to be ignored. The structure they thought was untouchable didn't just crumble. It was torn apart in an instant. Not piece by piece, not over time. It collapsed so completely, so publicly, that not a single trace of their control remained. What started in secrecy ended in exposure. What began as a quiet, calculated move turned into a full-scale, unstoppable reckoning. There were no whispered settlements, no escape plans, no second chances. This wasn't just a setback, it was total obliteration. A system they built to protect themselves became the same system that turned against them. The hands that once cleaned up their messes were now signing the paperwork that sealed their fate. The very people they trusted to manipulate the truth now sat frozen, watching their empire disassemble itself in real time. You don't need to explain how it happened. They know. They feel it. They see it in every closed door, every conversation that shifts when your name is mentioned. The verdict wasn't just spoken, it was felt. Not a single thing they relied on could withstand the weight of truth. The lawyers, the money, the influence, all of it burned away in the fire they set themselves. They thought this was about power. They never understood this was about purpose. They mistook control for dominion, strategy for authority. They thought they could dictate outcomes, but they never accounted for the one thing they could never control: the favor that goes before you, the unseen force that flips every weapon back onto the one who wields it. And now, they hesitate. They pause before they speak your name. They watch every move, not because they want to strike, but because they know they can't. Not anymore. The battlefield is no longer theirs. They built it, they set the rules, they stacked the odds, but the game was never theirs to win. You are here for a reason. If you feel the call, it's time to answer it. By clicking the Join button, you unlock exclusive content, deep insights, and a powerful community ready to walk this journey with you. This isn't just a membership, it's an awakening, a chance to step fully into your divine purpose and claim the path meant for you. Don't wait. Step forward. Join the chosen. The foundation of their empire had always rested on a single belief: control was absolute. They moved with the confidence of those who dictated outcomes, of those who believed power could be engineered, secured, and wielded with precision. Yet their greatest oversight was mistaking what could be touched for what could be controlled. They miscalculated, believing their reach extended beyond what was ever theirs to dictate. Every tool they relied on, intimidation, influence, force, was rendered ineffective. Every strategy crafted in shadows disintegrated the moment it met something beyond calculation. The mistake was assuming that presence meant vulnerability, that patience meant submission. They planned against an opponent they could see, but what unraveled them was something they never accounted for. a force immune to their influence, untouched by their schemes. And when the moment arrived, no wealth, no deception, no carefully placed piece in their game could stop the inevitable. They ignored every warning, brushed aside every failure, convinced that their influence could outmaneuver consequence. When their carefully laid plans began to unravel, they searched for explanations, blaming bad timing, misplaced trust, and unforeseen errors. Yet, they never once considered that what stood against them was not coincidence, not mere resistance, but something beyond their grasp, immune to fear, unaffected by force. Their defeat was sealed the moment they aimed their intentions against what could not be broken. What they believed was a hunt was nothing more than a slow march toward their own downfall. Every desperate action only deepened the pit beneath their feet. Every cover-up only illuminated more of their deception. The harder they fought to maintain control, the more the walls around them caved in. They expected silence, a swift and untraceable resolution, but what they received was a reckoning that could not be stopped. What shields does not only protect, it redirects, turning every scheme, every manipulation, every false sense of power back onto those who wield it, serving as an unshakable reminder that there are forces beyond human hands. Step into your potential. Subscribe now, and let's create something extraordinary. They believed outcomes could be dictated, that verdicts could be shaped before they were spoken. Their confidence rested in the weight of their wealth, in the legal shields they had always relied on, in the influence that had never failed them. But what they did not anticipate was a force operating beyond their reach, one that does not yield to money, does not bend to power, does not trade truth for convenience. Their weapons were tangible, yet useless. Their tactics were calculated, yet ineffective. They set the stage for their own triumph, yet found themselves standing before something that could not be bribed, threatened, or rewritten. When the final judgment came, it was not just a decision, it was a statement, a declaration that they had lost far more than a case. The timing was no accident. Every obstacle, every delay, every shift in events aligned with an unseen precision they never accounted for. The very fabric of their control frayed at the edges until it could no longer hold. The voices they thought they had silenced rose at the exact moment they were needed most. Their carefully woven deception fell apart under the weight of undeniable proof, appearing in places they never expected, arriving at moments they could not stop. This was not luck, it was not chance. It was something far greater, ensuring that no falsehood could survive beneath the weight of truth. Their downfall did not end with a verdict. It lingered in ways they never could have imagined. It was not just legal defeat. It was the erosion of everything they once stood on. The power they held so effortlessly slipped through their grasp. Those who once stood beside them now hesitated. Plans they had in motion collapsed before they could begin. Where once they walked without question, they now second-guessed every step, each move carrying the risk of further exposure. They could feel the shift, even if they refused to acknowledge it. The sense of control they once commanded was no longer theirs. They will call it miscalculation, betrayal, unforeseen circumstances. But deep down, they understand what truly happened. They fought against something far greater than themselves, something that could not be silenced, rewritten, or undone. The very system they shaped to secure their power became the very force that turned against them. Because corruption can only hide for so long before it is forced into the light. And in the end, every move they made to destroy became another step in their own undoing. This was never just about survival. It was about dismantling the illusion of their dominance. What they lost was not just a battle, but the foundation of their control. Now hesitation lingers where confidence once ruled. Their names, once spoken with authority, are now whispered in caution. It's not that they no longer wish to strike, it's that they now recognize the cost of trying. This was never a simple confrontation. It was a realignment of power, a shift that left them exposed in ways they never anticipated. The scales did not merely tip, they collapsed under their own weight. Their downfall was greater than they ever prepared for, and even their arrogance will not lead them to risk facing that force again. The impact of this victory is more than visible, it's undeniable. No countermeasure, no revision, no desperate attempt to reclaim their influence can erase what has already been set in motion. They crafted their strategy with meticulous precision, believing every move was in their control. Each decision was carefully placed, every resource strategically used, every vulnerability accounted for, yet none of it mattered. They miscalculated, not because their tactics were flawed, but because their enemy was never who they thought it was. Their schemes were exposed before they could be executed. Their whispers of deception were already being dismantled before they had a chance to act. What they mistook for luck was never chance. It was foresight beyond their comprehension. Every attempt to ensnare you unraveled before it could take shape. Every carefully plotted ambush turned to dust before it could be sprung. The war they believed was theirs to dictate had never been theirs at all. They never realized that the battle was never fought alone. Their reliance on numbers, deception, and brute force left them blind to the reality they could not control. The weapons they placed their faith in failed them, their tricks collapsed, and the people they trusted to carry out their will became the very ones who dismantled it. What was meant to be a swift execution became an irrefutable testimony against them. The hands, once conditioned to obey without question, hesitated. The enforcers they depended on found themselves immobilized, paralyzed by something far beyond human will. Those who operated in shadows now found themselves in the light, no longer acting as extensions of power, but as voices revealing the truth. What they expected to be their final move became their greatest exposure. Their hidden operations, once protected by silence, now stood in full view, and no amount of denial could erase what had already surfaced. The influence they assumed was unshakable had fractured beyond repair. This was not just survival. This was the very proof of their downfall. And now, they understand the truth they never wanted to believe. No strategy, no force, no deception will ever be enough to undo what has already been decided. It is not that they cannot reach you. It is that every attempt to do so is dismantled before it even begins. Your journey to greatness starts here. Subscribe now and let's make it happen. For years, they moved unchecked, dictating outcomes before the first move was made, convinced that nothing operated beyond their control. Every decision was made in secret, every opposition crushed before it could rise. But now, the ground beneath them has shifted, and they feel it in ways they never anticipated. The authority they once wielded so effortlessly now slips through their grasp, not by accident, but by design. This was never just a single loss. This was the dismantling of an entire illusion. The systems they trusted failed them, the influence they leaned on fractured, and the certainty they once carried turned into hesitation. Now every word is measured, every step considered, because they understand what they are truly up against. It was never just about escaping their grasp. It was about eliminating their hold over you entirely. The moment truth was spoken with undeniable force, a boundary was drawn that they will not dare to cross again, not for lack of intent, but because they now grasp the consequences. Their arrogance led them here, and now they are trapped in the aftermath. They watch with wary silence, names once spoken with confidence, now muttered with caution. Conversations stall when your presence is mentioned. Those who once stood boldly against you now tread lightly, uncertain, aware. They lost something greater than a case. They lost the belief that you could be touched, controlled, or erased. Now, every move is slower, every command softened into a whisper. They navigate their own spaces with the weight of knowing that whatever force dismantled their empire is still watching. They built a machine of precision, relying on secrecy, on silence, on an absolute control that allowed no deviation. Every step was meant to ensure the truth never surfaced. But in the end, their downfall came from within. The hands they trusted to execute their will became the instruments of their own destruction. The one they appointed to erase a name instead became the voice that ensured their legacy would be one of failure. Every carefully orchestrated move crumbled in a courtroom where their own enforcer became the final witness against them. This was not strategy. This was not legal maneuvering. This was a reckoning they never foresaw. The verdict did not merely signal the end of a battle. It was a scar on their legacy, an irreversible shift in how they would be remembered. No longer spoken of with reverence, their names now carry the weight of disgrace. Their story is not one of quiet defeat, but of a collapse so profound it became a spectacle. The people who once controlled narratives became the cautionary tale. Their trusted weapon became their greatest liability. The battlefield they once ruled became the site of their humiliation. They set out to deliver an ending, yet what they ensured was undeniable proof that no force they could summon was greater than the one that stood against them. No deception, no strategy, no attempt to reclaim their grip will change what has already been written. The message is clear. Nothing formed against you could ever succeed, not even by the hands they once relied on. The ground beneath them did not just shift, it collapsed entirely. Those who once moved with certainty now hesitate, their confidence shattered by an outcome they never prepared for. What they lost was not temporary, it is irretrievable. There is no reset, no return to the power they once held. They thought they were the architects of fate, the enforcers of silence, the ones who dictated who would rise and who would fall. Yet, in the end, they were the ones undone. Every attempt to erase you became another step in their self-destruction. Every challenge they threw your way only reinforced what they failed to understand. You are not standing alone. What surrounds you is beyond their reach, untouchable, unshakable, inevitable. They intended to extinguish a voice, but instead, they amplified it. The very resistance they built against you became the proof of your endurance. Their tools of destruction turned into the very evidence that sealed their downfall. Where they expected to see you broken, they now witness something they cannot rationalize, the presence of what they could never overpower. They will not remember you as an opponent. They will remember you as the force they could not erase. Their failure is not just a loss, it is a reckoning. The control they wielded so effortlessly dissolved before their eyes, not because they were outmaneuvered, but because their power was never real to begin with. They mistook their influence for invincibility, their strategies for permanence. But nothing built on deception, fear, and manipulation can stand when the foundation is tested. And now, they watch in silence, forced to accept what they cannot change. What should have been your downfall became your testimony. What they sought to bury has only risen higher. This is no longer just about survival. This is the formation of something lasting, something greater than they ever imagined. Your story is not just yours. It is a beacon for those who still stand in the shadows, waiting for proof that the impossible can happen. Speak, share, let your journey be seen. There are others who need to know that no scheme, no force, no opposition can undo what is meant to rise. This is more than a victory. It is the spark of a legacy that will continue far beyond this moment. Let them witness it. Let them understand. Let them know that what stands in truth cannot be overturned.